The mirror doesn't lie. That's what my mother used to tell me, back when I was young and my reflection still felt like a friend. I was 46 years old, standing in my bathroom on a Tuesday morning, when my husband of 19 years looked at me over his coffee cup and said the words that would end my life as I knew it. "You're old, fat, and no longer attractive." Just like that, between sips of coffee, like he was commenting on the weather. My name is Diane Foster, and I want to tell you what happened after those 11 words left my husband's mouth. Because sometimes the worst moment of your life is also, without you knowing it, the beginning of the best one. But I didn't know that yet, not that morning. That morning I just stood there, holding my toothbrush, toothpaste foam still on my lips, staring at Richard like he'd slapped me because in a way he had. "What did you say?" I asked, even though I'd heard him perfectly. He didn't even look up from his phone. "You heard me, Diane. I'm just being honest. Someone has to be." 19 years, 2 children raised, a house we built together, room by room, mortgage payment by mortgage payment. Countless nights I stayed awake with sick babies while he slept soundly, telling myself it was a partnership, that marriage meant sacrifice, that love wasn't always fireworks. Sometimes it was just showing up. I had shown up every single day. And this was what 19 years bought me. A stranger at my kitchen table, looking at me like I was a disappointing purchase he regretted making. "I've been going to the gym," I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. "I've been trying." "Trying isn't the same as succeeding," he cut in. "Look, Diane, I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm trying to be real with you. You've let yourself go. We both know it." I set the toothbrush down on the counter because my hand had started shaking, and I didn't want him to see that. I didn't want to give him that. "Is there someone else?" I asked. The silence that followed was its own answer. It stretched out between us, heavy and suffocating, filling up the kitchen like smoke from a fire I hadn't seen start. "That's not what this is about," he finally said. Which, if you've ever been lied to, you know that's exactly what it means when someone says that. I want to tell you I stood tall in that moment. I want to tell you I threw my coffee in his face and walked out with my head held high. But that's not what happened. What happened is I went into the bathroom, locked the door, and cried silently into a towel so our 17-year-old daughter, Emma, wouldn't hear me through the walls. Because that's what we do, isn't it? We swallow our pain so it doesn't spill onto the people we love. We carry it alone, in bathrooms, behind locked doors, with towels pressed to our faces so no one hears the sound of a heart breaking. I looked at myself in that mirror, really looked. Lines near my eyes that hadn't been there in my 30s. A softness around my middle that no amount of salad seemed to fix. Gray threading through my dark hair like someone had taken a silver pen and drawn careless lines through it. Was he right? Had I let myself go? Or had I simply lived? Had 3 pregnancies, 2 miscarriages I never fully recovered from, a mother's death, a father's slow decline into dementia, 20 years of putting everyone else's needs before my own. Had all of that simply worn grooves into my body and faced the way water wears grooves into stone? I didn't have an answer that morning. I only had grief. A strange, disorienting grief, because how do you mourn a marriage that hasn't technically ended yet? How do you grieve a man who's still sitting at your kitchen table, still sleeping in your bed, but who looks at you like you're already a memory he's trying to forget? I went to work that day. I taught 3rd grade at Lincoln Elementary, and I stood in front of 22 8-year-olds and taught them about fractions while my own life felt like it was breaking into pieces I didn't know how to add back together. At lunch, my friend Carla found me in the teacher's lounge, staring at a sandwich I hadn't touched. "Diane, hey, you look like you've seen a ghost." I told her all of it, the words, the silence when I asked about someone else. Carla's face went through several emotions, shock, then anger, then a fierce protectiveness that made my eyes sting with tears again. "He said what?" she hissed, keeping her voice low so the other teachers wouldn't hear. "He said I'm old, fat, unattractive." Saying it out loud a second time somehow made it more real, like the words needed repetition to fully land. "Diane, honey, listen to me. Carla grabbed my hand across the table. That man does not deserve you. Do you hear me? Whatever is going on with him, that's about HIM, not you. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But when the person who's supposed to love you unconditionally looks at you and finds you lacking, some small, wounded part of you starts to wonder if he's just the only one honest enough to say what everyone else is thinking. I went home that evening and made dinner like nothing had happened, because Emma had a chemistry test the next day and our son Michael was away at college, and I didn't want to unravel the fragile normalcy of our household over something Richard would probably wave off as him just having a bad morning. But he didn't wave it off. He didn't apologize either. In the weeks that followed, the comments continued, smaller ones, quieter ones, but no less devastating. Comments about what I was eating. Comments about my clothes being frumpy. Comments comparing me, without ever quite saying it outright, to women half my age. I started shrinking, not physically, emotionally. I stopped speaking up at dinner. I stopped sharing my opinions. I became smaller and smaller in my own home, like I was trying to disappear before he could finish the job of erasing me himself. Then, 3 months after that morning in the bathroom, I found the messages on his phone. Her name was Amber. She was 31 years old. And the things he had written to her, the things he called her, the promises he made her, those were words he hadn't spoken to me in over a decade. I sat on the edge of our bed, phone in my trembling hands, and felt something inside me finally, quietly, break. But here's the strange thing about breaking. Sometimes, it's not the end of you. Sometimes, it's the very first crack of light getting in. I didn't confront him that night. I didn't cry either, not this time. I simply sat there in the dark, staring at photographs of a woman 30 years younger than me, and I made a decision that would change absolutely everything. I closed his phone. I set it back exactly where I found it. And for the first time in 19 years, I started making plans that had nothing to do with Richard Foster at all. He had called me old, fat, unattractive, disposable. He had no idea what I was about to become. I want to tell you something about the days that followed discovering those messages. They were the quietest days of my entire marriage. Not peaceful. Quiet the way the air goes still before a storm makes landfall. I didn't confront Richard. Not yet. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I made a plan, and I kept it entirely to myself. I opened a separate bank account. Small deposits here and there from substitute teaching gigs I picked up on weekends, money I told him was for school supplies. I called a lawyer during my lunch break, sitting in my car in the school parking lot, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. I started documenting everything, the comments, the late nights, the excuses that had grown thinner and thinner like fabric worn down to nothing. And I started, slowly, terrifyingly, doing something I hadn't done in years. I started coming back to myself. Not for Richard. Not to prove him wrong, though I won't pretend some small, wounded part of me didn't want that too. I started walking every morning before school, not to lose weight, but because the quiet rhythm of my footsteps on the pavement was the only time my mind felt like mine again. I signed up for a pottery class on Thursday evenings, something I'd wanted to try since I was 22 years old, and life kept insisting there wasn't time. There was time. There had always been time. I just spent it disappearing into everyone else. Carla noticed before Richard ever did. "You've got color in your face again," she told me one afternoon in the teacher's lounge. "I mean it, Diane. You look like yourself." "I feel like someone new," I admitted. "Maybe," she said gently. "You're just becoming who you were before you started shrinking for him." Those words stayed with me for a long time. 6 weeks after I found those messages, I finally confronted Richard. Not with tears, not with screaming. I sat across from him at the same kitchen table where he'd once told me I was old and fat and no longer attractive, and I slid my phone across to him with the screenshots I'd saved. His face went pale. "Diane, I can explain." "I don't want an explanation," I said, and my voice didn't shake, not once. "I want a divorce." He tried everything after that. Anger first. How dare I go through his phone? How dare I embarrass him? Then bargaining, it meant nothing. It was a mistake. He'd end it immediately. Then, finally, something that looked almost like real fear. Deanne, we have 19 years together. Emma, Michael, you're going to throw all of that away over one mistake. You didn't throw away 19 years over one mistake, I told him, standing up from the table. You threw it away over months of choosing her while you made me feel like garbage for existing in this house. I'm just the one finalizing the paperwork. The divorce took 8 months. It was ugly in places, dividing a house, a life explaining things to Emma that no mother wants to explain to her daughter. But somewhere in those 8 months, something unexpected happened. I kept becoming more myself. I finished my pottery class and started teaching an evening session at the community center. I lost weight, yes, not because Richard said I should, but because my body finally felt like something I wanted to take care of, not something I was ashamed of. I got a haircut that made me feel 20 years younger and cried happy tears in the salon chair, much to my stylist's bewilderment. I laughed again, really laughed, from somewhere deep in my chest, at dinners with Carla, at silly videos Michael sent from college, at Emma's increasingly sharp teenage wit. I was 51 years old the day the divorce was finalized. 51, and for the first time in a very long time, I looked in the mirror and didn't search for flaws. I just saw myself. Richard's relationship with Amber ended 4 months after our divorce was finalized. I heard about it through mutual friends, the way you always hear about these things, secondhand, wrapped in gossip, delivered with a raised eyebrow. Apparently Amber had grown tired of being the exciting woman in a man's midlife crisis instead of an actual partner. Apparently 31-year-olds want futures, not just escapes from someone else's unhappiness. I felt nothing when I heard. Not satisfaction, not sadness, just nothing, which, if you've ever healed from something, you know is its own kind of miracle. A year passed. I'd moved into a small house near the lake, one Richard had once called too modest for us. I'd started my own small pottery business on the side, selling handmade mugs and bowls at the local farmers market on Saturday mornings. I was seeing someone, nothing serious yet, just a kind, quiet man named Thomas who ran the hardware store and who looked at me like I was someone worth looking at, not someone to be evaluated and found wanting. It was at that farmer's market, exactly 1 year and 2 weeks after Richard had called me old and fat and unattractive, that I saw him again. He looked older, tired in a way money and status hadn't managed to disguise. He stood at the edge of my stall, staring at the mugs I'd made with my own 2 hands, and for a long moment, neither of us said anything. "Diane," he finally said, you look incredible." "Thank you," I said simply, because I didn't need his validation anymore. It was nice to hear. In the distant way, a compliment from a stranger is nice, but it didn't touch anything inside me. It didn't need to. He shifted his weight, looking suddenly nervous in a way I'd never seen him look before. "I've been thinking about us, about what I said. I was going through something, a stupid, selfish thing, and I took it out on you, and I've regretted it every day since." I waited. I'd learned, in the past year, the power of simply waiting and letting silence do its work. "Amber and I, that's over. It's been over for months, and I keep thinking about you, about us, about how good we had it before I ruined everything." He took a breath. "Diane, is there any chance at all, we could try again?" I looked at this man I had loved for 19 years. This man who had once been my whole world, who had once made me laugh so hard I cried, who had also, somewhere along the way, decided I was disposable the moment I stopped looking exactly the way he wanted. And I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Gratitude. Genuine, quiet gratitude, because if he hadn't said those 11 words that morning in the kitchen, I might never have found my way back to myself. I might still be shrinking, still disappearing, still measuring my worth by his approval instead of my own. "Richard," I said gently, "a year ago you looked at me and decided I wasn't enough, and I spent a long time believing you." I paused, watching his face carefully. "But I'm not that woman anymore. I don't need you to beg for a second chance to know my own worth. I already know it." "Diane, please." "I hope you find peace, Richard. I really do." I handed a customer their change, my hands steady, my voice steadier still. "But I'm not going backward. Not for you, not for anyone. He stood there a moment longer, searching my face for some crack, some hesitation he could work his way into. He didn't find one. You were never fat, he said quietly, almost to himself. You were never unattractive. I was scared of getting older, and it was easier to blame you than to look at myself. It was, perhaps, the most honest thing he'd said to me in years. And it didn't matter anymore. Not because I didn't care, but because I'd finally, completely, stopped needing him to say it. He walked away that afternoon, and I watched him go without a single flicker of longing. That evening, Thomas helped me pack up my stall, humming some old song under his breath, glancing at me with a kind of easy warmth that had nothing to do with what I looked like and everything to do with who I was. As we loaded the last of the unsold mugs into my car, I caught my reflection in the window glass. Gray hair I no longer dyed. Laugh lines I no longer hated. A body that had carried children and grief and finally, joy. The mirror doesn't lie, my mother used to say. She was right, it never had. It was Richard's voice that had lied to me. It had lied for 19 years, whispering that my worth was something he got to define, that my body was a report card he got to grade, that growing older beside him was a failure instead of exactly what marriage is supposed to look like. I drove home that evening with the windows down, the lake breeze moving through my hair, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt something settle deep in my chest. Not anger, not triumph, just peace. Because the woman he called old, fat, and no longer attractive, she hadn't disappeared that morning in the kitchen. She had only just begun to wake up.